have a question for both of you, actually. Thank you both for a very stimulating presentation. You both talked about the Hennigan School. And
Louder.
Sorry?
Louder.
Louder, right. You both talked about the Hennigan School, and you showed some videos of the Hennigan School where you did your doctoral study. I mean, what was the outcomes of the Hennigan School? I was lucky I also visited the Hennigan School. And what happened to it? Because one of the things that often disappointed me about the brilliant work of the MIT team is you wondered what had happened. Did it continue? Is it still going? What was the residue of all that brilliant work when the MIT people went away? I just wondered, because I think this is something that maybe we've learned from the past, is to think how we can keep a record of all this wonderful stuff that's gone on and make sure it won't be the same, but make sure that we build on what happened in the past. So I suppose my question, as you guys who were there involved in Hennigan, what happened to it? And what can we learn from the Hennigan experiment?
Well, I showed an image of the computer museum that closed its door, I think, in 2001. I mean, the building was closed. Some of the exhibits moved across the Charles River to Science Museum. But the same actually happened with the computers at Hennigan. I mean, when not just the MIT team, but also the whole notion that coding was important went away. Project Headlight, which was 1/3 of the school, it wasn't the whole school, also went away. They still have computer labs, but that project as such doesn't exist anymore.
I know that, but why? Because some people have asked even earlier today, what happened to it all? We need to have some idea about what happened, all that massive effort and talent, and then it's bubbled up again. But I'd just like to know, disclose, so why?
My perspective on it, and I was more involved in choosing it, and my comments about social justice, Hennigan School was not in a terribly salubrious part of the city of Boston, and that was quite intentional.
Yeah.
We could have been in very posh suburbs with, and Seymour, who was a native of South Africa and very leftist in his leanings, really wanted to show that these kids, there certainly were worse schools, but there were teachers who were willing to participate, and so the cycle of university funding as well as anyone. So your projects get funded, research associates are available, hardware is purchased, teachers are trained, but over time, teachers get promoted to other places, they retire. The big factor was the machines, at least in some of the, maybe not, I wasn't around the end of the Hennigan, but in some of the projects I was associated with, the machines just became obsolete. So, and a big thing was the difference between 1985, 86, and 89, 90, when Joe Average could do interesting things on a computer without programming. All they had to do was to run the mouse or, punch this or whatever. That was a big factor. Graduate students get funding for a while. Faculty members who have built relationships there move on. I mean, there's nothing simple about it. It's evolutionary, but it's very hard to fight. That was my comment about technological obsolescence and so forth.
Yeah. Thank you.
I wanted to make a comment about social justice. I mean, Scratch was actually, after the Hennigan School closed, because Mitch never really had interest in schools, but he started the Computer Clubhouse, which was at the time, which started in Boston and became an international network of clubhouses all over the world. And nearly all of the clubhouses actually in the United States were in underserved communities. I worked extensively with 2 of them in Los Angeles. So Scratch was actually specifically developed to exist not in a school setting, to rely on teachers and build on observations in those communities. These kids, they have, hundreds of photos and remixes putting themselves with Chris Brown. You might not know that, but he was a very popular rapper at the time. So there was this whole Adobe Photoshop culture, but there was very little programming, I mean, except in a few clubhouses. So I think Scratch, as well as electronic textiles, I mean, there are intentional efforts to kind of connect, if you want, not just to create tools for underserved communities, which connect to culture there, but also if you think about the electronic textiles, to bring kind of traditional crafting, you know, the low tech together with the high tech, because we don't think often about crafting and sewing in connection with robotics or high technology. But you know, they're now an equal part. Many people actually forget how much many of those activities were part of the computer revolution initially. I mean, that women created, I mean, the frames for the IBM, you know, for the spacesuits. They were done by women from Playtex, I mean, who designed underwear. So there's a lot of interesting connection, which I think if you only focus on the high end, and I think that's also the problem with your example of parents who are well situated, who choose to opt out because they have the option. I don't think communities, you know, where both parents work, they don't want necessarily their kids to be away because they don't have the time and resources. The example you gave, they can do it, but they choose to do otherwise. That's not an option which many parents have.
So I really enjoyed both of those talks. I'm very happy to hear them. I'm very interested in deepening the participation. I appreciated Bill's remarks a lot about that. I was recently at a meeting at CMUSD, and we had a working group, actually 3 people in the room that were in that working group. And we were trying to develop things to do in math class for kids at work. And one of the big ideas was they have to care about what they're doing. So that's the big message in deepening participation, I think, for me. Why would I learn Scratch? It helps me to do something that I care about. And when you started to talk about that, I said, well, I'm going to get her with a question because she's not going to actually produce anything that I think girls would care about. And then all of a sudden, boom, there was textiles and so forth and so forth. And that's really great. But we need to go beyond, a long way beyond that. And I mean, that's just a wonderful challenge for us, I think. So I'm hoping to sort of hear more about that.
You know, we did beyond the big data analysis also very extensive. There are a lot of examples of extensive case studies, and we looked also at programming collaboratives among kids. We found to our surprise, and the girls actually collaborate too, and there are a lot around literature. For those of you, The Warriors of the Sky from Aaron Hunter, you know, book for the 10 to 12-year-olds. There's no animation available, no movie. So the kids actually use Scratch, and they use the comment function to enact all the gameplay. And there are, I mean, studios with over 500,000 comments. I mean, so it's very active, but it's not very rich programming-wise. So I see these kind of very differential patterns, but also connection points. And we have tried also in the Scratch community to initiate collaboration because we didn't want just the kids who already knew each other, you know, to get the benefits of these kind of online creative collabs, which people observe in other places like Newgrounds in the music industry, where you have a lot of music sites, where you have a lot of examples when people come together. And it turns out to be surprisingly difficult to kind of engender these collaborations. And I think that's where we as teachers will have a lot of challenges to kind of move beyond the 5 to 8% who have already figured out how to participate and exist in these communities and work with different materials to kind of get those people involved in the next level. It's there in kind of bits and pieces, but it's also very differentially distributed. Yes?
I just wanted to know if there's been any research that you're aware of studying at what age there's a divide between the male and the female preferences. You know, the males start to not to go into programming or coding or computational thinking activities, and the girls start to go the other way. Is there a certain age where you start to see that?
There is a lot of research on the relative narrow perceptions of computing, which all students, by the way, have. I mean, if you know, let's not fool ourselves. Very few students actually engage, even when you start early on, when you go into high school, and even also if you look at college, who is enrolling in those courses. It's a very small fraction of the college student population. By that time, we all know it's relatively late. And I think the point is also to think about these narrow perceptions are not just about who is doing it, but also what people are making. It's very interesting. The very same kids, they have a smartphone, they use tablets. I mean, they're on the internet, they do all kinds of things. So it's not the lack of connection with technology. It is a lack of having access to the tools and understanding, access to the communities, because you can't learn these things on your own. You have to kind of connect with others. But if your perceptions are very narrow, and it starts early on, there are fantastic studies, draw an analog, draw a scientist, draw a computer scientist. And you see this even with elementary school students. It's invariably, you already know what comes, you know. It's a guy with frizzy hair and, you know, has crazy eyes, and it's net. So, Richard, I didn't look at you. So you have actually, to answer your question, it starts at the elementary school age.
Can I just piggyback on that,
Yeah.
though? Because that's exactly what I was going to say, too. I teach grade 2, and at that age level, we're in the little Chrome project and what have you. I don't really see a difference at all. The girls are just as interested and just as involved. And I think it's really, I mean, that's even younger than grade 8 age. Obviously, I think there's a huge difference between introducing it to 7-year-olds versus 12-year-olds. So I wonder if the connection point would be an age thing as well.
It's so deeply ingrained when we use electronic textiles. I do it in public schools, so I have boys too. And the first comment is always, oh, sewing is a lady sport. You know, the coding is the man's stuff, you know, the hard work. And it's surprising that at the end of each project, that it's the boys who are most proud of their crafting, the stitches, whereas the girls turn around and kind of become more, I mean, feel much more confident and strong. And you know, the funny thing is, neither the boys nor the girls know how to sew. I mean, this is, you know, schools don't teach this anymore. So it's very few kids who actually have experience with this. But these stereotypes are so persistent on who is doing what, that, I mean, even in lack of visible evidence and experience, they're still there.
As you're describing the project, there's a lot of very careful care of the community and trying to maintain balance. I'm curious if you were to give that to a government to take care of, and in the context of a mandated curriculum, do you see that as something that could actually function, or would that you see a lot of difficulty in moving in that direction?
Oh, what a great question, because Scratch right now, Mitch has actually a fairly large team, I mean, of people who are not graduate students who run the community, because those communities do not run themselves. You need community managers. I work a lot in another virtual world. I spend a lot of time hanging out with 12-year-olds, Wyville.net, that's in connected play, and They actually set up mechanisms of community policing. But it will be a real challenge because what the companies are doing, they essentially curtail all communication. They're afraid to be sued, and you know what 12-year-olds do, to use all the forbidden words, and they know all their ways around the chat filters, so believe me. I mean, they're very, very innovative about that. So I actually wouldn't know. I mean, Mitch has not just support he has people from Wall Street who are pumping in money. And I know the graduate students are now talking about the scratch tax. Everybody has to kind of pitch in with the project because you can't run a community with over millions of participants. And I don't think we actually have addressed this in a way that creates both a safe space, because parents and teachers would require that there is some level of responsiveness, but also which allows, that you can freely comment in Scratch. You're not pulling down from a menu where you have 5 options between that's kind of sucks, that's terrific, or so, if you want to adopt the language. Kids can write their own comments. We actually just will present on Monday an analysis. We pulled 8,000 comments from those 5,000 participants and looked at the language of online peer support because we were interested in absence of a teacher or somebody guiding the directions. Are kids bullying things? And it turns out to be that there is a significant level of support. We gave the paper the title, I have a tutorial for this. Kids create tutorials that provide constructive feedback. And that was actually very comforting to see. But I don't have an answer. Scratch, can it accommodate, millions more of participants? Where does it break? Because obviously you can't run this just on government grants. And we got a lot of government grants, significant funding, both for the design as well as the support. But also for the maintenance. And I think this is the same issue of technology in school. It's not just getting the hardware in, it's also having the tech support. So you need community support just to run those places as well. Yeah.
Understanding is I teach high school computer science. And what happened in the UK, they were able to do what they did recently because they just replaced an existing mandatory course from ICT to programming. In the US, you've got the CS10K, you've got Obama doing the hour of code with kids. In Canada, I don't see anything. I know it's not a question, just to throw it out there as far as there's things going on at the grassroots level, but it seems like other countries have ideas what to do, and we have nothing. So.
Well, what's happening now you can all become a member for free of the CSTA, which is a Computer Science Teachers Association, and it actually has quite a vibrant international community because this is happening not just in the United States but everywhere else. And they do a lot of. Actually, Canada was not included in the international surveys I checked. But you can find out what's going on in other countries, what people are doing. And so in the US, half of the states have now actually certifications for teachers. And I predict within the next 4 or 5 years, all of the federal states will have that, as well as standards for the curriculum. So, and then you can see the single kind of follow suit.
Because we're moving backwards. Like Boise, I did my CS at Boise, they don't even offer it this year. And then I had 2 student teachers. I've only been teaching 5 years, but I was in the industry for 18 years before. Now they have no student teachers for computer science. So we're moving backwards because of the funding model. The 2-year Boise doesn't have any computer science.
This is a big issue. We have been doing research in the US also. There's a big project, like 16,000, 10,000 computer science teachers by 2016. That sounds like a gigantic number, which of course will not be reached. But even if you think about it, the United States actually has more than 10,000 high schools. So even if we were to create 10,000 high school teachers, this would mean there would be at a high school each one teacher alone, doing it. That's a very lonely kind of enterprise. So not only do we need to think about pre-service in this area, how schools and colleges of education need to change their curriculum and offerings, but we also need to think about the in-service part of where we can create supportive communities for those teachers who actually go out, so that they're not just the only person at the high school. They will have nobody else to talk to in terms of designing curriculum and dealing with all the challenges which come up when you, not just dealing with the technology, but also the curriculum part, which isn't, very, we don't have a rich array of curricula either. There is the principles course, there is exploring computer science, which Jane Margolis and Joanna Buddha have developed, and it's predominantly used in over 4,000 or 5,000 students in underserved communities only in Los Angeles, Chicago. We are actually now going to start next month a project of creating an extension unit for exploring computer science with electronic textiles. So from now on, you can choose between robotics or electronic textiles, and in 3 years, this will be nationwide implemented.